3,500 Egyptians stood between Aeimnestos and the occupation of Damascus. While the gates being open may have eliminated one barrier, the city and its reinforcements both harboured a formidable force. That ultimately would not be a problem for Aeimnestos and his elite crew, but would merely slow down the process of capturing the large town. With most of the guarding force taken down by the Cretans and the reinforcing army rapidly approaching from the north, the Spartans make their way into the town. The Egyptians, it appeared, were taking no risks, pushing their men into a race to the town. It was no surprise that the reinforcements made it first, but they would be exhausted and subsequently easier targets for the Spartans. They too soon make it into the town. A unit of chariots were quick to greet the invading Greeks, but their fragile crafts fell apart at the sight of the spearmen. The hoplites made their way through the streets to the plaza, taking down chariots as they went. One brave Egyptian steered his chariot into the horde of Greeks, successfully taking one down before he too was destroyed, and the Spartans kept marching without missing a beat. Like a nest of angered wasps, the multitudes of Egyptian cavalry charged from the plaza and into the mass of Spartans. With a loss of only 5 Spartans, the cavalry were dealt with, and only the infantry on the plaza were left to deal with. The Egyptians were outnumbered and outmatched by the Greeks, and the Spartan men took them down with little effort on their behalf. With the plaza now secured, what was left of the Egyptians' defences came racing to try and retake control of the town. The Spartans blocked up the streets, blockading against the mercenaries charging towards them. The Bedouin archers and eastern mercenaries stood little chance against the might of the Spartans, and once they broke, the eastern men were easy enough to mop up. With the last Egyptian down, another eastern city falls back into Greek hands, and the discontent people of Damascus are enslaved. Now they can be unhappy somewhere else. With his army refreshed and retrained, Dymas was ready to begin his journey to the Nile Delta. While Jerusalem was none too pleased with his departure, with enough of them recruited into basic training, that displeasure was quick to disappear, and Dymas continued his trek. To the north of the empire, Amphidamos the Killer would continue to reap revenge for the capture of Massilia, killing yet another of the Gauls' generals. From the cities, a steady stream of reinforcements arrived for Philotas's army. As he remains a steadfast guardian of the bridge on the two factions' border, Dymas crosses over the Egyptian border, stopping before the first of 3 bridges to Alexandria. A look at the mercenaries does not reveal the elephants he so hopes for. A spy is sent to infiltrate Bostra, the next target for Xanthippus. Perhaps the general could be removed from the town prematurely. With the agent work done, the Greek general marches to Bostra and lays it under siege. His agents held the gates open for him, but Xanthippus would wait a moment to gather himself before inviting himself into the town. With peasants waiting outside the city to occupy, Aeimnestos leaves Damascus. Once the city was settled, the Greek leader replenished his weakened Spartans with a lesser unit, losing the second stack of Spartans in the campaign. With his troops sorted, he begins his travels south to join up with his brother in Egypt. Epilogue also moves to the south, ready to join his father and uncles in conquering the Egyptians. Now mentally prepared, Xanthippus was ready to begin his assault on Bostra. His banner and his opponents appeared to have been stolen by Bastet before the battle commenced. With no ranged opposition, the hoplites lined themselves before the open gates of the town, while the archers decorated the streets with the bodies of spearmen. With the last valiant soul going down, the hoplites begin the advance, manoeuvring to block the streets with their spears. The armoured hoplites advanced through the small streets, the Egyptian infantry futile in trying to stop them. The pharaoh and his cavalrymen also charged to the head of the pack, but he soon becomes cut off and surrounded, though it most certainly appeared he was not going down without a fight. However, there is only so much one can do when completely surrounded by infantry that have a combat bonus against cavalry. With that, yet another enemy king lies dead beneath Greek feet, and the march to the town centre continues. 6 Nubian spearmen remain, then 5, then 4, and 3, and 2. The power of the hoplites transcends the mortal realm, and Zeus strikes down the last 2 Egyptian men, but the hoplites clearly did not touch them. There was no cheer of victory, as by this point conquering had become quite mundane. Xanthippus claims the town of Bostra for himself, exterminating the minuscule population in an attempt to improve the overall mood. It does not work. What does work is lowering the tax rate and replacing the inferior Egyptian shrine with a clearly superior one to Athena. With agents now free, they move south to Petra, ready for its up-and-coming invasion.
Who shall die this day? At your service. Investigating.
Winter turns to summer, and just like the inevitability of the changing of seasons, so too was the inevitability of the Gaul once more attacking Philotas on the bridge over the River Durance. At least this time they had brought something that might present a challenge. Perhaps it was folly to have high expectations for one's foe, to believe that perhaps this time they would be able to make at least a small dent in their force, but alas, hoplites and archers were enough to complete the ritualistic sacrifice that the Gaul must be performing. The elite men fall beneath the Greeks and the rest run in fear. The cavalry chase down the stragglers, completing the ritual for this year. The Gaul army ceases to exist, and another suitor is rejected for having drill master, and the fact that he was 51. In the east, Aeimnestos and Epigeius continue their pilgrimage south, the distant Egyptian wonders growing ever closer each season. The first of many agents infiltrate Petra. The city had an interesting mix of troops. While the city may have lacked any of the elite troops, the streets will be paved with mercenaries' bodies on Xanthippus' walk to victory. With a spy scouting the way ahead, Dymas makes his way for the lesser defended Memphis, and the pyramids that would secure the loyalty of the Egyptian peoples. A small force stood outside the walls of the city. Dymas tried to attack the force and drag the city's defences out, but alas, he was unable to reach them. Now with his own force built up, Nicodromos leaves Antioch, ready to move to where he would be needed most. Summer draws to a close and a tiny Pontic army besieges Mazaka, and another suitor is rejected. While the Pontic besiegement force may have been small, from what could be seen of the attacking force, there were chariots and well-trained missile cavalry, units that may very well outmatch the mercenaries that defended the city. With another larger Pontic army approaching from the north, Timotheus of Sicilia was recalled from his southern travels to back up Nicodromos in favour of returning north to help defend Sinope should Aspergus decide to attack. Back by the Nile, Dymas' spy slips into Memphis successfully, and the general proceeds to hold the city under siege. Anthimakos had done a good job this day. The gates had been opened, however the city was surrounded by stone walls, and the defences around the gates would result in more casualties in using siege equipment. On the other hand, there was barely anyone home, and the hoplites would meet barely, if any, resistance on their flight through the city gates. A single unit of hoplites spread out and out of their phalanx charged towards the open, undefended gates on the opposite side from where their army had deployed. Wall defences picking off the men one by one, felling 9 of the armoured hoplites by the time they made it through the gates and to relative safety. The hoplites scaled the walls and captured the gates and surrounding guard towers, and with the way now cleared, the rest of their small invasion unit could enter the city. Situated before a choke point in the architecture, the hoplites block up a gateway, and the Cretans fired from behind, their arrows flying in a graceful arc straight into the unit of desert axemen, aggravating them and drawing them over to the hoplites for slaughter, all while the archers continued to whittle their numbers down. Distressed over the number of enemies before them, the axemen do not last long against the hoplites, breaking and running back to the plaza after only killing 2 of the Greek men. The hoplites pursued the running men onto the plaza and finished them off. One unit dealt with the pharaoh's bowmen, while another 2 advanced on the approaching general's bodyguard. The heavy cavalry charged with reckless abandon onto the ready spearmen. The hoplites were severely battered, but the surrounded pharaoh goes down, though in exchange for one of the Greek units routing. A fair exchange, seeing as the battle was almost over anyway. What remains of the invasion force takes down the last of the Egyptians of Memphis, and the city now belonged rightfully to the Greeks. Dymas enters the city and orders for the execution of the unhappy population. Sitting on his new throne in the centre of Memphis, Dymas admired the Great Pyramid and Sphinx of Giza, both fine acquisitions for the empire. Perhaps now the Egyptians would put up less of a fight now and accept the Spartans' rightful rulership. Anthimakos had already used up his infiltration equipment this season, but that didn't stop him from positioning himself ready to sneak into Alexandria on the dawn of the new year. Aeimnestos continues his journey to Thebes. 1 more year and he would be there. Epigeius also continues south, heading towards Petra to potentially reinforce his father, should he need the help. Xanthippus' agents make it to the city, his spy joining their fellow agent, significantly raising the chances of the gates being compromised. Xenophon the Killer tries his luck against the general occupying the city, The newly made faction heir would be no challenge at all, and as such he was quick to fall beneath Xenophon. While the Pontic force besieging Mazaca may have outclassed those inside, at the very least the Greeks could make an attempt at picking off some of the elite troops instead of being sitting ducks. Mazaca had the slight advantage, but that still might not be enough. Radiant slingers lined the walls, firing down on the Pontic men as the missile cavalry left the city. Having no siege equipment, the Pontic men were falling back to a strategic position and the Greek cavalry were following closely behind. When they ran out of javelins, the cavalry charged into the rear of the softened infantry, the men of Pontus breaking almost immediately. The cavalry were able to escape off the battlefield, but the infantry that remained was swarmed by the cavalry, and another successful sally battle goes to the militia cavalry. The Pontus army retreats back to their own lands and Timon of Antipatria improves as a commander, gaining 2 points of command. A shame that was probably the beginning and the end of his military career. In the north, Amphidamos continues his killing spree, taking down the general of yet another approaching army. With peasants from Jerusalem now occupying Bostra, Xanthippus was ready to begin his journey south to Petra. Aeimnestos continues his own journey south to Thebes, checking the local mercenaries at the end of the leg, but not finding any to his taste. Now refreshed, Dymas' spy infiltrates Alexandria, and Dymas continues to ready Memphis for his departure. With the people of Pontus appearing to be a potential looming threat, Epideios changes his course of action. Nicodromos also heads north to further reinforce Mazaca and Sinope. Xanthippus completes his march to Petra and finds the gates wide open on his arrival. Even with plenty of time to prepare, the Egyptians had done little to reinforce the city's garrison against Xanthippus. The Greek general had the clear advantage, and it would be rude of him to keep the Egyptians waiting for their departure to the underworld. By now, city assaults were a well-rehearsed dance. On both sides of the city, a team of hoplites waited next to the busted open gates while their supporting archers cleared the way. Once the men guarding the gateway had been removed by one means or another, the hoplites began the advance into the city. The northern team were the first to enter. Units of heavy chariots were the first to try and fend off the armoured hoplites. They swarmed the invading Greeks, successfully taking down 4 of the spearmen, but as the many chariots before them had found, their attack did not end anywhere near in their favour. With any resistance removed, the northern team began making their way to the city centre. The southern team had an easier time entering the city, the archers dealing with any approaching Egyptians while the hoplites manoeuvred through the gates. Both teams make their way to the plaza, both meeting and dealing with any resistance along the way. With most of the elite troops now lying dead in the streets, it was now down to the Egyptian peasants armed with mighty pitchforks to violently fend off the Greek invaders. The topless peasants threw themselves at the armoured hoplites. The Greeks paid no mind to them and simply pushed through the simple village folk. The hoplites continued to push through the Egyptians as they threw even more of their men against the Greeks. More and more joined in the skirmish and the hoplites remained steadfast through it all, whittling away at the Egyptians until none remained upon the plaza. The Greek army works on picking off any stragglers, those scurrying across the plaza taken down without any hesitation. The call of surrender was rejected, those last few cowards could not be given the easy way out. The last peasants stand before the line of hoplites, and the hoplites do what they do best. Only 2 more settlements remained before victory would be declared, and Xanthippus only hopes that he would still be around to see it happen. He marches into Petra and exterminates the unhappy people. Aeimnestos also finishes his trek to Thebes. However, he finds that the city is currently a bit plaguey and the people were rioting. He decides that perhaps waiting outside of the city until at least one of these issues had been quelled would be the better option. Slightly to the north, in Memphis, Dymas was ready to leave the city and places the now rioting city of Alexandria under siege. Even if the gates had been opened by his agents, with the number of troops inside the city, Dymas would want his siege towers. To the north of the empire, more Gaul armies were congregating around Massilia, but with that came more opportunities to take down their generals and gain valuable experience. A little to the east, Campus Jazyges once more found itself besieged by the Britons. Doceatus once more readied himself and his soldiers to preemptively fend off this assault. The Britons had brought with them some tough men, but while woad warriors may have had a mean swing, the swordsmen did not deign themselves to wear armour, making them easy pickings for the militia cavalry. Cretans lined the tall city walls of Campus Jazyges, firing down on the backing up Brits, All the while, the militia cavalry poured from the city gates, picking off the stragglers of the Britons' pack. The poorly armoured men stood no chance against the onslaught of javelins to the rear. The militia moved from group to group, charging into their backs when their missiles ran out, the 400 horses moving as an amorphous blob of death. The sheer overwhelming number of cavalrymen was enough to break some of the Briton units, making them all the more easy to cut down. A good number of the blue-clad men were able to escape off of the field, but it would prove to be enough to send the generals and their army back to where they came from. The summer of 206 BC dawns, and with it brings more plague, only this time it's Alexandria flavoured. Well, that would certainly thin out the garrisoned army. Thebes, at the very least, had cleared itself of rioting and the plague. Perhaps the rioters had died of plague. Regardless, the siege of Thebes could now begin. Another Pontic army had put Mazaca under siege, and Nicodromos makes it in time to reinforce the city. The forces of Mazaca had a closer look at the Pontic army besieging their city. The two forces were of equal strength, but with several onagers, chariots and cavalry, persistent waves of militia cavalry would perhaps not be enough to fend them off. It was fortunate then that Nicodromos was there to scare the Pontics away. Winter arrives, and with it so do the Gaul at Durance Bridge. A lot more elite units made up the ranks, and a lot more were armoured. Philotas still held the strength advantage, but the odds were getting closer with each engagement, though the Greek general did not worry, seeing as the Gaul threw themselves to the death at the end of his hoplite spears each time before. The hoplites raced into their positions surrounding their end of the bridge, but it appeared that the Gaul had learned from their last several battles. The Forester warband lined themselves along the opposing shore of the river, but it appeared that that's where the barbarians' intelligence ended. The archers ambled to their places, allowing the Greek archers to pick them off. Their general gets shot down before the Gaul even fire off one volley in return. Seeing as the Gaul were not going to voluntarily cross the bridge, it was time to try and bait them. Militia cavalry crossed the bridge, firing a volley of javelins at the column of Gaul, but it looks like the barbarians were not to be tempted. The militia pulled back to their side, and the hoplites began the march. In most cases, marching across a bridge would be a death sentence, but the last two Gaul brain cells had already been used, so the hoplites were able to cross the bridge and get into formation. The centre of the formation was in position when the Gaul finally decided to charge in. The flanking units were still able to manoeuvre around the engagement, allowing the hoplites to fully pin the Gaul in the sides. The rest of the hoplites made their way across the bridge, and the Greek infantry scoop around the barbarians. Standing steady, a small Gaul threw themselves into their spears, the chanting of druids drowning out some of the barbarians' screams. It did not take long for the first Gaul to start routing, and when one goes, the rest follow shortly behind. With the barbarian ranks now dissolving into disorder, the hoplites began pursuing individual Gaul units, trying to keep up as the mass rout began. Seeing as the hoplites were not going to catch the running cowards, the cavalry were deployed. Half of the Gaul were able to get away, but perhaps it would give them second thoughts on trying that stunt again. Philotas celebrates another victory, and Campus Jazyges is once more besieged by the Britons. The siege towers were built, and next to no one was home. It was time to invade Thebes. Spartans and Cretans, split off from the main force, prepared themselves for an easy victory. Retirement would be soon. To their left, the siege tower began its crawl to the blind spot in the wall's defences. The Spartans have a leisurely climb to the top. No opposition faced them as they made their way to the western gateway to unlock it for the rest of the infiltration force. The Bedouin archers in the meantime made their ways to the soon-to-be-open gates. With the gates unlocked, the Bedouins charged through and into the guarding bowmen, breaking them almost immediately. The Greek army marches into the city towards the plaza, and the Bedouins race ahead to deal with the Pharaoh's bowmen. The cavalry pull back, and the Cretans shoot down the last of the bowmen. The plaza was clear and the countdown began. All that remained of the Theban garrison were its onagers, that had not made a single move throughout the invasion. The Bedouins raced through the streets, stopping just around the corner of the artillery unit, and began firing down on the sedentary onagers. The very lightly armoured Egyptian men fall beneath the arrows with little resistance. With most of their unit dispatched, the last of the artillery make a run for it, but in the end they too fail to escape from the Bedouins' arrows. The last man falls and the Bedouins give out a cheer, for the Greeks had come one city closer to victory. The population of Thebes were executed, and only Alexandria stood before the Greeks and imperial victory. While the city may still be strife with plague, it was the last obstacle, and surely it would be a small price to pay in the face of victory. The garrison of Alexandria was varied, but not anything to be concerned about. On the field, an onager would be a formidable opponent, but considering their performance in Thebes, it was just another set of men to shoot down. He may not have taken on much of his father's teachings, but Dymas would be the one to finish his mission, and he was most certainly going to give War something to cry over. Siege towers manoeuvre into their positions on each side of the city, each assaulting a blind spot in the city's defences. The western towers breach the walls first, and the hoplites make their way to open the gates for their assault team. On the eastern side, the siege tower was partways through its advance to the walls. There would be a fight for this gate, so a second unit of hoplites make their way to the wall ready to join the tower team. The west gates were opened and the assault team make their way in. The eastern tower made it to the walls, and two units of hoplites begin scaling up to the walls and running to engage the Egyptians at the gates. The rest of the assault team tuck in next to the walls. The hoplites stop before the gatehouse opening, forcing the defending Egyptians into a choke point. It appeared that the onagers were going to contribute in this defence, though taking out their own defences did not seem to be the wisest move. Another volley from the onagers fired, aimed at the Greek infantry on the walls. The rocks miss, but they were getting concerningly close. The onagers fired once more, and the massive boulders from the inaccurate machines go wide. Another shot, and somehow they still failed to hit any of the hoplites. And another that hits the siege tower, with a second narrowly missing. The onagers get one last lucky shot, and in an instant 230 armoured hoplites are crushed under the collapsing siege tower, and with the rest of their unit instantly killed, those fighting on the walls break. On the western side of the city, the assault was going far more successfully. The assault force was in position, and a unit of hoplites began the march into the city. The western force makes their way through the defences with ease and make way for the plaza. The cavalry stationed in the city centre charge straight into the approaching hoplites. The light Nubian cavalry were the first to charge in, shortly followed by heavy Egyptian chariots, both of which fall beneath the hoplites within seconds. The chariots loop and bumble around, but in the end they nick the spears and fall dead. The plaza may have been secured, but at least half of the Egyptian army still remained in the city, and more chariots were on their way. The Egyptians stopped the countdown timer, but do little else to oppose the hoplites marching over and through them. Desert axemen were the next to try and stop the Greeks, but the hoplites would cut them down with ease as well. With the heavy infantry out of the way, the hoplites moved further down the street to finish off the chariots. The plaza was once more cleared and the countdown was steadily decreasing, and seemingly sensing their defeat, the rest of the Egyptian garrison do not make any moves to stop the victory. When the timer hit 0, the Greeks for once accept the call of surrender. The garrison would be destroyed anyway, and there was still a lot of them manning the walls. It seemed more trouble than it was worth to pursue them further. Dymas steps into the pharaoh's palace and, ripping down the Egyptians' heraldry, he completes his father's task. Victory was his. Civilization had been spread to every corner of the world. The Greeks ruled wisely and well across many lands, and this was victory. Better still, it was a victory achieved under their intelligent and diligent leadership. Truly, the gods of Olympus had blessed them with miraculous powers of command. And using such intelligent and diligent leadership, Dymas exterminates the population of Alexandria. And with that, the story of Hero of Sparta draws to a close. I want to thank you all for Whoa, we're not done yet. What? You can't just end it there. What do you mean? You've still got the rest of the map to conquer, you know, shouldn't you, I don't know, actually finish the game? With Hero's goal now achieved and wanting to be able to see the world conquered before their deaths, the Sons of Sparta relinquished the strict and arbitrary rules their grandfather had set and they had followed until now.
Forward! Out of move! No more move! Move out! March! Victory!
And there we go, Hero of Sparta, a tale that took 4 generations to tell. It has been an honour to tell this tale and to actually complete a game of Rome to the very end for the first time. While this may be the end of this story, this is not the end for Rome Total War. Keep an eye out for Summer Bridge Challenge runs as well as behind the scenes style video for this series. Thank you all very much for joining me on this journey, and I hope I will see you on the next one. Bye!
Fight for God, and you believe it's right to risk your home, your life, to face the evil night. But in the darkest night, when our children are asleep, I think about the families of our enemy. Feel the same, believe in their own truth. They must love the children.